All right, welcome back into the live stream today. We're going to dive into XRP, give you guys a little bit of a breakdown on the current status of where the project is in relationship to the lawsuit with the SEC. Also take a look at some of the sentiment data and also some of the trading analytics on where the TA is leaning on XRP. Hopefully it'll give you guys a little bit of a lowdown on whether or not this is a good time to buy, hold, sell, all that kind of good stuff. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath. Let's dive into a couple of the news items today. Before we get started though, just do remember, if you have some questions, drop them over in the side chat. We'll try to get to those as best we can. And kind of jump in to it right off the start here. XRP gaining ground on the bullish side as Ethereum, ETH, and Solana also are printing reasonable lows. This, of course, is basically saying that XRP is showing some interesting signs for upward movement. Now, interestingly enough, when you look back in our historical analysis on, and when I say historical, meaning the last 12 date points that we print on the Crypto Power Index, which is twice a week, what's been happening with XRP is we've been seeing some trends up in sentiment, even though they're in different phases. And I'll show this to you on our chart with TradingView with a little bit of market cipher overflow to give you guys kind of an idea of where this might be going. But there is some good signs here for XRP, so stay tuned for that. Let's talk a little bit about also what John Deaton is saying. John's been on our show many times. He's talked about some of the key things that have to happen with XRP for, in this case, for it to really kind of roll into the next phase. And of course, as we all know, you guys are the XRP army, you're out there. You know that a lot of this token is pent up in terms of demand. We're also seeing a lot of movement onto exchanges. We see the whale moves that are starting to kind of resemble some very interesting formats of how we're seeing tokens get ready for listings. And this is something that I think we'll probably see on projects like maybe Robinhood. That could be one of the first ones, ironically, to list the token when it goes live. But John was talking about this. As they prepare for the next chapter, lawsuit following the court's final ruling on the deliberative privileges, his point is that he thinks this is going to really move into a judgment for a ruling versus a settlement. So emails and documents most relevant to the fair notice, Ripple can win on a strict Howey analysis. And if they do, the court never has to decide on whether Ripple receives a fair notice. I can now see that there's being no settlement and the parties let the judge decide via the Howey. And he continued adding that the settlement is likely less than the XRP lawsuit ending with a judge decision. So interesting that he's going this route. John and I have talked about this a couple of times. I'm kind of on both sides of the fence. I don't really think it matters if it's going to be a judge ruling or if the SEC. The one scenario with the SEC, if there is a settlement, that means there's going to be a fine. If the judge rules, then that means essentially they've got the case thrown out. So that in itself would be a pretty big black eye to the SEC. Now, granted, what we've seen so far in terms of what the SEC has been facing is pretty staggering. I mean, even in the sense that they've kind of backed off some of their own legal instruments that they've been trying to move forward with. Even that has kind of shown, I think, where they are looking at this. And it's also fading into some other aspects from a legislative front that may be affecting the rest of crypto as well as XRP itself. But crypto firm Ripple, this obviously court battle with the SEC has gone exceedingly well. This is coming over from Brad Garlinghouse. And there's a video here. I want to play a little bit of this for you guys just to kind of get an understanding of what he's talking about as this reporter kind of dives into it.
Currently in a legal battle with an SEC that's been going on for a year or so. Can you give us an update on that and when you expect a resolution?
You know, that started in December 2020, and the core question there is around a nuanced legal question. Is XRP a security? And did Ripple sell, as an XRP, an investment contract, did Ripple sell unregistered securities? Did I, Brad Garlinghouse, sell XRP as an unregistered security? I think it's very clear that in the United States, the laws have not been clear. And for the SEC then to go back in time and say, you should have known all along, it's really, I think, going to be hard. It's a hard case. And I think what we're seeing in the court process, which does continue to play out, is a judicial process that recognizes some of this. Even this past couple days, there was a ruling from the court finally giving, requiring the SEC to publish information about some speeches that the director of corporate finance, Hinman, gave about Ether not being a security. And the fact that even now you have the SEC not able to answer the question, is Ether a security? They won't answer that question. They're saying there's clarity, but then they won't provide clarity. They're saying they won't comment on specific projects, but then they comment on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of the largest projects, but yet still just a project.
Just in terms of broader crypto market regulation, we had, of course, the executive.
All right, so you guys can kind of see, I mean, this is really where Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse, I mean, he's very confident. That's the whole point, is I think that they've been briefed enough by their attorneys and legal counsel that this is kind of moving into the next phase of the particular case. And I think as we look into this, could we see something much earlier? Early this year, I still felt like this was an end of year kind of scenario. This, I feel like, is leaning a lot more in Ripple's favor and could be in a completely different scenario. So, cool stuff. This was another statement here on just some of the big news. And I think when we see the Federal Reserve getting into the point of having more and more people that are crypto aware, I don't necessarily call this crypto friendly just yet, because obviously we need to see what Barr is going to do in reference to this. This is Biden, where he's nominated Michael Barr as the top Fed banking regulator. His awareness, he's obviously a former Ripple exec and advisor. And I think the scenario here is he going to be pro-crypto and understanding where blockchain is going in terms of cross-border payments, borderless payments overall, especially when you think about the SWIFT component and how all of this is rolling into things like sanctions and really bringing a lot of this to the front of the political scene. And I think this is going to be an interesting selection by Biden, but in a good way, in the sense I feel optimistic that this is still leaning positive toward Ripple and the rest of the blockchain fleet out there. But at the same time, because it's from a legislative front, and I understand how politics go, especially around the lobby side of things, this could also go sideways on us. So I just want to be aware of that. It is one of those things that you guys got to keep an eye on. So I'm optimistically hesitant on that particular selection. Deaton goes back over here talking about the judge should find that the secondary market sales of the XRP independent of Ripple are also not securities. So this means that the holders are going to win this thing. So this will be really good for John Deaton's class action lawsuit and all of the holders. I'm kind of curious as to what that might mean overall. Does it mean we see damages or seek damages? That may be something that goes out over some time. We're probably, once that we do see a settlement on this, we'll definitely get John back on the show and talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that is one of the more interesting aspects of how this may play out in the future. And then here's Jeremy Hogan talking about this. Of course, these are the two attorneys that really kind of been drilling down on this, at least from the legal analysis side. And we know for sure that the clarification part of Judge Netbird's really will not protect whatever the SEC is so concerned about. So again, still unknown as to what we're going to see coming out of this. This may very well be a smoking gun, and it may also hurt the SEC in some very interesting positions. So he kind of references the SEC is 100% in the hurt locker now, and the only relief is to delay. Now, sure, delay could happen, but the fact is we're going to see a judge that probably gets quite a bit more agitated with something like that, especially in these federal court cases. They just don't mess around. So it is one of those things I think that will start to lean in, again, back to Ripple's position. Before we get further into it and get breaking down some of the analytics and kind of where this token might be going, I want to thank our partners over at iTrust Capital. One of the things that is happening in the space, obviously tax day has hit. Now you start tax planning for can you believe it, 2022. But one of the things that I always do before really starting tax planning is getting my education lined up. And this is around people that I talk to, and all the time, that's the first thing they start asking is, Paul, where can I get really good understanding and where I need to go with some of these tax planning procedures and things of that nature. And iTrust does a really good job on doing just that. So you can kind of see some of their educational components they've put in. 7 things to know about your crypto taxes for 2022, IRAs and SDA IRAs. that how they work. Also a little bit about their coin announcements, so different kind of projects that they've announced. Obviously, they've really started to lean in a lot more on some of these other cool projects like Axie Infinity, etc., Avalanche, which I'm a big proponent of. All of that you can get on the IRA, crypto IRA with iTrust. So all you have to do to get your $100 funding reward is use our link below, and that's going to help us out. Hopefully it's going to help you guys out as you prepare for your 2022. Man, that's just so weird to say. 2022 taxes, and you need to start early because this is when it all starts to matter, because strategic plays in building your tax position throughout the year is the appropriate way to do it. All right, so moving on to this point here, SEC sit back in the suit adds pressure to define crypto assets. This is kind of setting up some things that the SEC is trying to do from an aspect of prepping, I think, for post-Ripple. And what I mean by that is they've, of course, adjusted with an interesting letter to Congress around the definitions of how and what they want to include. And one of the things that kind of was revealed right here on the financial services of the GOP, this is Republican leader Patrick Henry and also Republican leader Rep. Huizinga. And this is an interesting component because they really get into what they're talking about is trying to reassess how they're defining certain exchanges and how those are looked at. Now, where the SEC is going with this is the thing that is most interesting to me. And if you look at this tweet, it really gets into this section right here, further definition as part of a regular business. This is one of the things that they really got a little bit twerked about. This happened on March 22nd. So just here recently, the SEC proposed another rule that would further define the term as part of a regular business for purposes of registering under Section 15 and 15C. This is back to the whole Howey approach and securities. They're putting a lot more pressure, and I think what we're seeing is the lawmakers are starting to ask questions. This is a good thing. I'd love to get a couple of these guys on the show to kind of break this down, because I think what is going to happen here, especially with McHenry, because he has been a big proponent of just financial freedom for quite some time. And make sure to follow him on Twitter. I just want to bring his Twitter up right here. You can come find this guy right here. He's the North Carolina 10th District, United States Congress. But I'd check him out because he really is, and I've listened to him talk a couple of times, he really is a forward thinker on where this might be going. And I have a feeling he's starting to play chess with the SEC and where this might be going after the Ripple case. So lots happening in that. The other thing that Ripple is really kind of leaning into, and this kind of starts to move into the direction of if and why the token could be on the move. One of it is Ripple's take on NFTs and the XRP Ledger and what that might mean over a short period of time. There's a couple of good points on here that they're talking about on the topic of XLS20, that's their protocol. He stated that the issuance of NFTs started off as a proof of concept. Now it's being implemented in code. He also mentioned that the XRP Ledger is a great way to deliver NFTs, and it's also super green, which is another big aspect. And also when he compares it to others. Now, granted, there is a statement here that I think is a little bit either unprepared or just they're trying to figure out how to compete in this space. But XRP Ledger doesn't have the function where one can build their own NFT system using smart contracts. However, the transactions costs related to ETH network are much higher than those of obviously XRP. So that will be the factor that I think plays into this, is how gas fees go to functionality and utility within XRP. And I think as they start to continue to develop on this, this platform, I think they are going to start to see some advancements that need to probably be made in XLS20. We'll see how that starts to go. But there are some interesting things that come out of it. The other thing that is interesting is this right here, is their liquidity hub that will accelerate crypto-driven business models. This is something that we've talked about on the show many times. And what I'm talking about here is the adoption of crypto payments as we start to see kind of this transition between traditional centralized finance banks and also credit card companies, moving into where we see more and more businesses, which is a very key thing here, businesses, B2B, and also B2B or B2C sales, and how we see the potential of what consumers might be utilizing in terms of vehicles for payment in the future. And I think they really kind of drill it down here on this blog post. Enterprise applications of crypto liquidity. This gets into, companies like PayPal, Robinhood, all others, customers to buy, sell, hold crypto on using their platform, even Square's mobile cash. They kind of roll into, this is already a thing, and liquidity is going to be a big factor here. So for tomorrow's use cases, growing popularity of the technology means more companies will begin to receive and disperse crypto over the coming months and years. And I think that's where XRP and Ripple set in the crosshairs as the perfect position. Many people have called this the banker's coin, and I understand that there's good and bad from that, but I think this is one of those things that really starts to lean in on what XRP's overall advantages are and why this token is so underperformed right now, and really, in my opinion, pent-up demand for what will happen after the SEC case. They go on to talk about key considerations here to maximize these cryptos use cases. Companies will need an enterprise-level liquidity provider. This is the same thing that essentially credit card companies do, is enterprise level to be able to deal with the TPS, the transactions per second layers that you have to have in a lot of these global and even local and regional payments systems. I think a lot of this is going to be pretty cool. And of course, future is liquid and interoperable. A decade of listening and partnering to companies, financial institutions around the world. What this means is there's going to be a very interesting time in the near future where I see Ripple in a very good position in the global payments landscape, more than just SWIFT, meaning moving really messaging systems across, borders to essentially move billions in many cases. I think we're going to see a lot more flexibility and what that might be for XRP. Sologenic also partners with Allbridge to provide a cross-chain interoperability between XRP Ledger and the Binance Smart Chain. This is for Solo, just so you guys are aware. For Sologenic, here's the cross-bridge chain on Allbridge, and if you go in and actually run, a trade right here, you can of course go from the BNB Chain, XRP Ledger. This is the only asset right now, Solo. So I think this is going to be growing. I'd be watching the Sologenic tokens and also the Allbridge tokens in the coming months, especially as we start to see this get to maturity level. Maybe there's something here that we could see some interesting stuff on. So we're going to try to get to some of your questions. I do want to jump over to the charts. Before we get there, let's go to a poll real quick and take a look what you guys think. All right, XRP relisted all major. Q3, that's a good number. Q4. All right, so essentially we've got 80% of you that think it's going to happen this year. That's great. I like that. I'm kind of curious what major exchange you think is going to be first, because that's where you need to be poised and ready for all aspects, whether you're a long-term holder or maybe you're looking at trying to grab it on the way up. Lots of cool stuff. Let's move over to the chart, and I want to show a couple of things here for XRP, because this is something we've been tracking for quite some time. And one of the things that I have looked at is the comparison of market cipher, and also, if I can get my guy on that, sometimes it goes crazy. Market cipher and XRP kind of in unison with sentiment and how this applies. So what we did was we pulled sentiment back here on April 14th. Sentiment started to move up a little. We had a 73.67 and a 71.59. And then sentiment continued to rise right here, which we were pulled right here on the 18th of April, right there at 73.71 and a 71.85. So amplification has not necessarily flipped, but it is growing across sentiment. So what happens when I see that is it does mean that we could see some continuous slow climb, because we haven't seen amplification really started to move on this yet. But what's interesting right here, and I want to kind of go in here because I circled this little section right here. Let me get my drawing tool. This little section right here is a little bit of cash bump, money flow in, and you're starting to see the money flow come right here. Now, if you look back, the last time that we really started to see some movement here on this. Let me kind of go back here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to do with my mouse. The last time we started to see this same kind of movement was back here in February. And we had 224, sentiment was 74.98 and a 73.32. Again, upward movement and this upward trend. And right here was this little movement right here that we started to detect in that same period of time, where you start to see this green layer of money flow starting to move in. And this little guy right here is the one that is interesting to me, because it starts to show indicators of when we're starting to see movement on XRP. And of course, when you look at that one, let's just zoom back out just to give you guys kind of an idea of where that went in terms of price, from where we called it right there up to right there. So it had a nice 43% move over that period of time through the end of March. So again, is this the potential of where this could be moving right now is my question, because we're starting to see similar movement right here, both on sentiment and then also on money flow. So we've got a little bit of a green line. This is kind of my trace in and out here. Could we see this by end of month upwards of around or nearing back to the $1 point? So again, a lot of this leans in. We do have a couple of green candles forming right now, so it does have some signals that this is starting to move in the right direction for XRP holders. So again, you know, maybe this is another opportunity. Maybe it's the first time for you to be in XRP. Maybe it's the first time you've been able to get XRP at around 75 cents. Remember, we've seen this token move well above $1.20, and it has the potential of that $5 move, and especially if we start to see some scenarios come in where the SEC could kind of start to be in a position to settle this case. So good stuff. Let's get to moving into some of the questions. And we'll go with Idle Lou. Thanks, man. 4 times on your investment on Zill. Hey, listen, I'm glad you guys made some money on Zilliqa, and I'm always happy that you guys do that. But there are some people out there that do FOMO in, and I always try to reiterate these things, is that when we are talking about these projects, in many cases, when we first talk about it, we might have an executive on, you know, remember that there's been a lot of research that's happened before that. A lot of that is done over in our Diamond Circle and in the CPI. So that's the first thing you got to get in on that, because at least you're going to get a little bit of a heads up and have access to some sentiment data on this ahead of time. And Zilliqa is one of those that we were talking about quite a bit before it started to pump. So just, you know, be aware. Glad you guys made some money though. Could XRP flip Ethereum in second place market cap? You know, this is a question mark that we get a lot. I don't know that it can. It would really have to get active. I think just Ethereum has too much moving in. Now, there is some speculation out there. I won't say by who, but there are some speculation of analysts out there that are thinking that maybe there's a little bit of, you know, détente between and how XRP and Ethereum are going to go out, because you've got Ethereum's you know, merge happening possibly later now this year. Many people now maybe point 2023, and you have this potential for a settlement. How do those things kind of hit the markets at the same time? It'll be interesting to see. So I would still say no, but that's only obviously if Ethereum stays on track. If we start to see more delays with Ethereum, you know, things could be a little different. Rich, let's go to you. XRP was launched number 2. That is correct. You are correct, my man. Good history. Hill Dog, love the show. Thanks. In what way would a win for XRP cascade positive effects in our space? Okay, so winning and just beating the Howey test is going to help all projects for the past, but it doesn't necessarily change how the SEC is going to rule on this in the future. So the likelihood of the SEC ruling that there are many tokens that are securities, and Gensler said this many times. So it's clear he already has his bullseyes on his board. But getting to the point of just saying, hey, we're going to come in and regulate this, that's really the effect. And to a certain extent, there's going to be some good parts of that and some bad parts with regulation. But the biggest good part for regulation is this avalanche of money coming from the sidelines. Because the minute we get clarity there, you will start to see structured capital. So that's the real big win for that. Um, Billumetz. Okay, Paul, why do you dislike ADA? Okay, so first of all, just so we're clear, Cardano is, I don't dislike any coin. I'm an investor. I'm a speculator, and everything to me is ones and zeros. So looking at a project doesn't necessarily mean I like it or hate it. I look at it from a financial standpoint or from a trend standpoint or a sentiment standpoint, and that leans me in. Now, Cardano, project-wise, I look at it and I like how, if you think of Charles as a person, I think he's a dynamic leader. He seems to have innovation behind his kind of his concept of what he's trying to build there. But I'm always skeptical of any projects that slow down. And to me, that was where Cardano happened last fall when I got out of Cardano, made some money on it, and it was an investment that I chose to not go back into. So again, just one of those things. It's not every token is for every person. So, hey, Paul, what do you think about celebrities getting involved with XRP? Michael Jordan? Yep, I think this is good. It's going to happen. We're just going to see more and more of this. So I don't think it really hurts anybody. Bryce, Luna update. We're going to look back in on Luna. I keep putting out the message to Do Kwon, and we'd love to have him on the show. If you guys are out there, just tweet Do Kwon, hey, jump in on Paul Barron's show. We'd love, because I just love to have people like that one, we can really get insights beyond what you see in the news, because sometimes you can just ask questions that help people open up and really kind of move in that direction. Because I think a lot of people still look at Luna in a skeptical lens. And I look at it still, because I give everybody the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to do well and good for the industry. But there are some people out there that still look at it as a skeptical lens. I'm still leaning into the positive side of where Luna is going. And I just think he is, he's one of the brilliant minds in blockchain, and I don't think that's going to change anything. But Luna and UST definitely have some interesting futures. How about Shiba? We are going to take a much more serious look at Shiba, just because of the most recent news, and also I think with what they're trying to do, there's actually some signs there that we should start really paying attention to some of these projects that we have not paid attention to in the past. So that's on us, because sometimes you can get in a zone and certain projects you lean into and you kind of forget. And it's not that you don't want them, it's just a lot of times it's easier, and we should break out of what's easy, sometimes do things that are more uncomfortable for us from a research standpoint. So thanks for bringing that up. Ripple case be over by the 26th. That's next week. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have an insider there. You got a court clerk up there that knows something, but that's pretty cool. 26th. Man, if that goes on the 26th, we're going to see a nice ride for sure. All right, Sergio, what do you think about HBAR? Love it. Check out our videos with Mance Harmon. Really good insights on what HBAR is going. We should talk about HBAR more. We did a video on Mr. Wonderful and Cuban. I got some flack on that one because I didn't include HBAR and many of the other assets. There's a whole line list of assets that these guys both have. We were just trying to kind of lean on. But HBAR, like that project, and I own it, full disclosure. Like it, full disclosure. XRP hits $3, dump on the market. Whales, good luck, guys. Maybe that could be a point, Michael, but I think it will be timing. When I say timing, meaning how it aligns up with what Bitcoin and Ethereum are doing, regulation scenarios, and whether or not the SEC is starting to rattle sabers again. If the SEC kind of goes back and licks their wounds and stays off the map for a minute, then we may see a little bit of air under this before we start to see any kind of regulational pressure on Bitcoin and also on other projects like XRP. Sircan, regardless of the court case, many banks and financial institutions already use it. This is a thing that many of you guys that are watching here in the United States forget. Not even my own friends and neighbors and family, they forget this. That the United States is one of the smallest countries that is engaged in blockchain. We have 350 million people here. There's 7 billion on the planet. Sure, there's a lot of growth happening in certain sectors. China will probably start to see a lot more pressure, but at the same time, I still think we're going to see some movement with China. Already, we've seen a pretty interesting results and issues with Russia, but the emerging countries are the ones that I'm very interested in the Pacific Rim. that is the one and the two sectors that I think are going to be very interesting on how all of this goes from a global standpoint. And XRP is embedded in all of those kind of scenarios. So this gets back to where the United States is playing catch up, maybe for the first time in the tech landscape in my history of 25 years in technology. So that's a big one. GMT, we just did a video on this. Steppen, we just did a video on Steppen. So man, you're gonna watch that one because that thing is crazy. I just went back into Steppen today and I FOMO'd in because I just feel like that little token is gonna do some crazy stuff, but that's not financial advice. Just let's put the market mover thing up here because we give you insights, we give you data, we give you a lot of our sentiment stuff. All of this is really from our own research. It is not financial advice for you. Hopefully this is just a directive to get you guys going in the direction that start your research on some of these things. And Move to Earn is a new sector for Steppen. If you haven't checked it out, check out our video. You'll learn a little bit about it. But more importantly, understand those are high-risk assets and you have to be willing to take it. I'm willing to do that. I think of it like I'm going to the blackjack table. I'll take a small amount, which I did with Steppen. My strategy was very simple. I went in a couple of weeks ago when we did our video and I wanted to get in that video and I'll hold those for several days before I do an exit. And I sold later and made a little bit of money. And then I took that profit and re-entered back in today, thinking this token might edge up over $4. But when you look at the tokenomics on GMT, as our boys say, it screams don't buy. So just put that and remember it. Last question here. How long do you suspect we'll be able to grab some BTC as a current discounted price? Listen, you should have grabbed it right there at 40. But many people, including our own Evan Aldo, who is here on the channel a lot with our TA, still thinks we could see a 24K Bitcoin. And remember, these could be small micro pumps before we start to see a correction in the market. The market is still trending down. And if I see the overall, let me just kind of pull up this real quick before I get out of here, guys. Yeah, let's take a look at Bitcoin real quick. All right, so it's still trending down slightly. It's not falling fast, which is a good thing in the sense that we will probably see a positive sentiment start to paint this week on Wednesday. And if you look at the overall market, let me go to the CPI home real quick. Overall market, again, still trending down on overall market, but not falling fast. But everything is starting to kind of coalesce with exception of DeFi. DeFi is actually flatlining. I think this is happening because we're seeing a little movement from some of the some of the platforms that are reducing yield payments, and I think we're seeing some action on DeFi in that space. But Bitcoin still printing well above 321 and also 325. So it's likely that we could see a sentiment move if we hold out on this. So right now, I will tell you this, I am in a long trade on Bitcoin. I went in at, I think, 40,200 or 300. Did a long trade, and I'm playing that right now. So we'll see how that plays out. A little leverage on that one just to kind of play a long position on Bitcoin. All right, that's going to wrap that for the day. Listen, if you guys are listening in over on the podcast, that's glad to have you over there. But this is where you're going to get all the charts, the detail, the breakdowns. You can join the Diamond Circle over here. And of course, if you want to reach me out on Twitter, it's @PaulBaron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.